Joaquin Murieta is a graduate of the University of Arizona with a Master of Science in Natural Resources and Agricultural Economics and a PhD in Renewable Natural Resources. He's a native of Sonora, Mexico, and a resident of Arizona. Joaquin specializes in building resilience in diverse communities by enhancing the connections between people, culture, and natural resources. He brings vast experience on the multicultural border region between the U.S. and Mexico, where he has implemented community-based approaches to watershed management, river restoration, geotourism, conservation of native peoples, and best practices for the ranching community. His past work has been with the Sonoran Institute, Borderlands Restoration Network, and as a consultant for the National Geographic Society. Thank you. Joaquin.
Muchas gracias, buenas tardes, ¿cómo están todos ustedes? ¿Está bien si hablamos en español? How are we doing in terms of watershed management? And where are we going? I really like all the presentations from yesterday, from today, the ones I've been. And it's very interesting to see the kind of the control that we humans want to put on natural systems. And it's very interesting to see that. How do we want to control flows? How do we want to control sediment? How do we want to control this and that? But it's also, I work a lot with people, with communities. And sometimes we don't talk about the human behavior on nature. That's why I really like what Ben was saying in the sense of what is the relationship of all of us in the landscapes that we live and in the landscapes that we work with. Because that behavior has a lot to do with restoration, has a lot to do with control, has a lot to do with what type of landscapes and functionality do we want to see in our watersheds. And sometimes the time scale of things is also very, very relevant. Like Bill Sidai just mentioned just a few minutes ago. The time scale of the river is totally different than the time scale of the human. So we also need to understand that because we didn't get the proposal, because we need to be somewhere else this Friday, because this and that. And humans are always kind of in the run and doing this, doing that. So we also need to respect the time scale of things, the time scale of sediment. How long it takes for a sediment to build a one rock dam. We need to understand those things and respect that. Sometimes in a lot of restoration work, we want to accelerate processes. And sometimes that's why we have failures, because we don't understand the time scale of things, all right? So what I want to present here today is precisely that, to have a watershed perspective, watershed approach on conservation and restoration. And when I say that, it's a holistic approach to the health of the watershed, from top to bottom, from bottom to top, and also act like a river. A river, when it flows, it flows. It doesn't matter where. Whether it's a native nation, whether it's a Mexico nation, whether it's a US nation. So the river flows regardless. So we also need to respect that, all right? And I also am going to make a commercial at the end. For people that would like to take that, I'll put it in there. I have a bunch of slides. You already saw a bunch of slides of rocks and PALs and NDIS and all that stuff. Here, I think you're going to see a slice of people doing things. The approach that I'm taking is how do we build a culture of conservation, a culture of restoration? What is always Balair putting all those rocks? What is Van doing all those things? What is Bill doing these things? Why is not the whole culture of society doing these things? Why is not the teacher, the miner, the mom? So that's kind of my job, because we know how we do it. I mean, it's a lot of things that we know. But why is it that the community is not doing it? All right? So that's kind of the tool I'm using. How do we advance these things? I'm going to present 3 case studies. It's a pointer somewhere. One here on the Delta. Francisco talked beautifully about it yesterday. And the other 2 cases are here in the Santa Cruz River, which is a trinational, multinational river, and also in the San Pedro River with the same situation. And it's interesting also to see how whenever we talk about conservation and restoration, we get out of the built environment. It's always in rural areas. It's always in ranching communities. It's always somewhere else, but it's not the city. So what is the city role in restoration? Have you ever wondered that? What is the role of us humans that live in the city to have a healthy watershed? So that's another approach we also take in our Watershed Management Group. That's where I work, and been there for 10 years. Been working with people for quite some time. And I always like that, the human interaction with the landscape. So those are the case studies that we're going to talk about. And in 146 years ago, we were talking about watersheds. We're finally getting there. He says, well, think like a watershed, the whole holistic approach to the health of the watershed. And I always ask, from which watershed are you coming from? I come from the Santa Cruz watershed, which is this one, okay? I come from Tucson, but I was born in the Sonora River watershed in Mexico. This is a river. So the holistic approach is think as a unit of the whole watershed that is part of a bigger sub-watershed of the Gila or the Colorado River, and act like a river. Just work with everyone here, all right, as it's flowing. And also change perspectives. That's why I love this type of gatherings. Sometimes it just needs a little click in here, because we know how to do the things. We know we have a lot of knowledge, but why is it not happening, all right? Why isn't the Cacachilas not happening? Why isn't the whole La Paz not happening? Why isn't Tucson not happening? All right? Why isn't just one ranch over there and another ranch over here? Even though with or without cows. So we took a flight with the Kwapa people. And just having that different perspective of the landscape started changing the way we see the landscape. All right? And one image that is going to appear here, be the beaver, I guess, is that. That image changed the whole perspective of myself and the Kwapa people on both sides of the border. The Colorado River, the river itself, is this. But the water of the river is this. And that's happening all around the watershed of the Colorado River. It's not in the river. So that's the first question. Where is the water of the river? Where is the river in the river? Well, it's in your city. It's in your home. It's in your mind. It's in your irrigation fields. So how do we have less water in our built environment and more water in the river? Can we do that? Can we, instead of using 80 gallons per person a day in Tucson, can we use 40 gallons per person a day? And that way we are hydro-local. So the water comes from our watershed, as opposed to bringing water from all other systems. So that image for Doña Inocencia that was this, to see that, I mean, there are tears and all that coming to your face. And just, oh my God, look at the things we're doing to these rivers. And we're talking about restoration. So anyway, just keep that perspective. So we took a flight. We created a Kwapa mapping team just to see, how do you see the river? What is the river to you? And what is the conservation approaches to bring life to this Colorado River Delta? So thanks to this relationship, Francisco Zamora and others were able to create this pulse flow in the Colorado River Delta. The first one was in 2013, I believe. All right? And that's still happening. So that's fantastic. Just by changing something in the landscape perception of the human, regardless if you're white, if you're native, if you're whatever, all right? So that's acting like a river. It doesn't care who you are, right? Just respect that. So we created this Kukapa team, and whatever they wanted to share with us in terms of river restoration, it became to this. And this was the beginning of those pulse flows that we were talking about yesterday. Different perspectives, different wisdom, different ways to relate to the river. So changing something from this, which is the Colorado River Delta in San Luis Rio Colorado, to this. And it takes 20 years to have a pulse flow. This was the first pulse flow. But just the energy, the emotion, the relationship of these people to see the river flowing. That's my energy. It's just, wow, this is fantastic. So that way we took a little bit of water from the irrigation fields of the agricultural sector, both sides of the border, to leave it in the river. And it takes a lot of work to do that, right? It's a lot of meetings, a lot of blah, 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 all those things, okay? The minute, whatever number it is, the this, the that, the government, the community. So it takes a lot of human perspective change in our way of thinking. And things we learn is that, what is the river in the river? Well, it turns out that it's in the built environment or disturbed environment. What type of restoration are we talking about? And how do we adapt to that? Because we're not bringing rivers the way it was 100 years ago. That's never going to happen, okay? The perception and imagination of doing things. It's a lot to do with the way we think, okay? Why do I want a river? Why do I want to maintain the sediment where it is? Those type of things. And that's the functionality of nature, blah, blah, blah. And reconciliation of our behavior towards nature, all right? Because I do this, because I see in rivers the happiness of rivers flowing. So I want to maintain that happiness. Because when you see a river flowing, they're kind of happy, going towards the ocean. So how do we maintain that happiness? And then my mom told me in Hermosillo, well, poor river, he doesn't know that he's going to get stopped in the dam in Hermosillo. So is the water happy there or not? Of course it's not. It's not moving. It is stagnant. Maybe that's why I'm fascinated with working with rivers, to continue seeing that happiness. But my mind showed up one time with that phrase. Then we're here closer to Tucson in Arizona, and on the Santa Cruz River, which are multicultural rivers, and in the San Pedro River. What is it that we're learning from nature? What is it that we're learning on reading the landscape? That's why I love Valaire's perception of coming from New York, the girl from New York, and reading the landscape. What is it that the landscape is telling us? Wow, it's all this erosion. Wow, it's all these roots that are in the surface. Why is all these rocks? So that's reading the landscape, all right? And there are several things that have happened here on these systems. These are also human systems. Water comes from the Santa Cruz River to these cities that they're expanding. How do we create systems for people and nature? Whenever we talk about water, we immediately go to people. It's a human-centric approach. But water is not just for humans. It should also be for nature. So that way we are better off, okay? And it's interesting, there's the beaver again. There is interesting how we invest in community, we engage with community, we implement things, the demonstration things, how things can work. And then we start doing the regenerative walk into our landscapes. And how do we maintain that? So that way it's not Joaquin going back eternally to the Ejido sector in the Santa Cruz watershed. Because we get tired too, right? So what is the role of an ejido member to maintain these systems working? So it's a lot to do with that, and we call that beavering. How can we do more beavering in our systems? Because the beaver, what it does is three things: diminish the speed of water, spread the water, and infiltrate that water. That's all the beaver is kind of doing. So can we do that in our systems? Yes, we can. You saw a lot of slides on this. And they work. They work fantastically, actually. But you need to have the local leadership. So the local people is the one that is doing it. The time when we visit Valer Clark in the Coronado Ranch with these people, that changed their life. That changed my life. That was fantastic relationship right there. And they did it. They built like 2,000-3,000 gabions. They continue doing that. And there is a lot of lessons learned in this. And please celebrate your success. That's very important. Sometimes we forget to do that. We need to celebrate that, all right? Because that's life and that's happiness as well. Similar approaches in the San Pedro River, from the Santa Cruz to the San Pedro. And here we're talking, because the ranchers kind of know what to do. But now we're reflecting on the actions of the rancher to the landscape. We're not talking about techniques of restoration. They know it. But why they don't do it? Those type of things. So it's very interesting to reflect on 400 years of ranching in this landscape and to understand the changes that they are doing into the landscape. It's just, whoa, we are doing all that? Yeah, you are doing all that. Can we change the things we do? Yeah, you can change the things you do. So it's very interesting reflections that we're having with the ranching community, to the point that there is the river again, to the point that ranchers are creating rain gardens in their communities to infiltrate the water from their home to the watershed. So that's pretty unique. So that way their ejidos are not flooding whenever it rains. So they're installing tanks, they're installing little rain gardens, they are adapting technologies, and they know how to do all these things. It's just changing the perspective of how do we manage rainwater in your town, in your home. And so that, to see a rancher plant a tree, that's just so weird for me. It's just, wow. They're not dealing with cows. They're dealing with planting trees and grasslands. But just reflecting on what they do, because this is what they do. You have a bunch of cows, a bunch of erosion, and then they say, well, one day it rained a lot, so the soil went. Oh, it's not the cow, it's the rain. So understanding that, because a cow used to walk in here, and then it rained a lot, it was going to the water. The cows, what they create is a little walk pathway. And it's compact soil, it rains, so water starts flowing in there. Suddenly you have something like that, all right? And yes, the rocks here again, it's kind of band-aids to the surface of the landscape. But this is from the view from the soil ground. But look at the effect on a couple of rains. We finished this in May, some year, 2017, most likely. And by August, it looked like that. And we didn't plant anything. It's just humidity and soil retention. Let nature do the work. Let beavers do the work. So this is tremendous amount of work of beavering. And yes, the rocks, which is funny, sometimes we need to buy them from the mining company that is extracting all the water of the San Pedro watershed. So how do we balance those things? Well, we are learning from the beavers. This is the beaver work in the San Pedro River on the Mexico side. Next week, we're monitoring the beavers just to understand the health of the San Pedro watershed, where beavers are. But this is an interesting symbiosis. It's that this was a reservoir. Well, the rancher reservoir is somewhere up here, there. So the beavers are taking a little bit of water from the reservoir to expand that reservoir. So we're creating that relationship of rancher and beaver. So it's very interesting to see that symbiosis of those two species that are working towards the health of the watershed, learning from the beaver. And things we learn: invest in community, invest in people, health of watershed. You need to have a baseline. Where are you starting and where do you want to go? Common ground with human interaction. And nature, community, and health, they go together. And then is the whole urban environment that I'm going to stop there. But we're working a lot in visioning flowing rivers for Tucson. And that's our vision. And it's going to take us 50 years to get there. We are in the way. We already are in our 8th year of working in there. By understanding this graphic that you're going to get, hopefully on PDF, you can do a lot of stuff. And it's just respecting the water cycle. All right? Can we infiltrate 50% of water on the ground? Figure it out how. But if you infiltrate 50% of the rain on the ground, you're in very good hands. I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to show you these images because they came. Be the Beaver again. We're transforming campuses of schools in Tucson from this, that are creating tremendous amount of flooding in the streets of Tucson, to rain gardens like that. All right? And that's only 2 years of work. And the kids are doing it. So that's the culture of conservation that we're advancing. Thank you so much. And sorry to take 2-3 minutes away from you.